jingle. Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews and to what I hope is the first video in my new series, Overbooked. It's a series where I'm talking about every single book on my bookshelf. Each series is getting a review. You can watch my announcement video, if I filmed it. I haven't filmed it yet. You can watch that if you're interested that way. Assuming that no books have been published by Alan A. Aardvark in the time between me starting filming this series and series 1 going up, we are starting off with a bang, and by a bang I mean the thunk of the severed head of one of your enemies hitting the floor. That's right, we're kicking off with Joe Abercrombie's The First Law Trilogy. It would be totally remiss of me to mention this series without pointing you towards Justine over I Should Read That, who is the person who got me onto these books. She is the biggest Joe Abercrombie fan I know. She is full of all the wisdom and she has also read his other books, so allow me to firmly push you in her direction, but stay here too. Follow both of us. You can watch 2 sets of videos, that's fine. And if you're looking for the thoughts of someone who, at this point, has read a grand total of 5 Joe Abercrombie books, I think that you're in the right place. I am going to talk about all 3 books in this series. There they all are. So if you want to go in knowing absolutely nothing about any of them, then this is your chance to click away. I'm not going to give away any massive plot spoilers, but we are talking about a series as a whole, so just bear that in mind. Other note, I bought all of these books myself. No one is paying me to talk about them. I have had review copies of his latest stuff, but that's not coming into play in this video. The other thing I want to request is that while I do love these books, they've stayed on my shelves after all, I do not have an encyclopedic knowledge of this trilogy or this world. So if I say anything wrong, if I've misunderstood an element of the plot, if some of it hasn't sunk in and you think, she didn't mention that this character is this, then by all means correct me in the comments, but don't be gatekeepy. What is this series? This is a grimdark series that started in 2006 with The Blade itself, and it ended in 2008 with the publication of The Last Argument of Kings. In the middle of all of that, no surprises, 2007, we got Before They Are Hanged, which is the second book in the trilogy. That was a weird way of presenting that, but there you go. As mentioned in my announcement video, probably, I haven't filmed it yet, I really wanted to use this idea of talking about all of my books to get better at talking about books in more of a kind of informed way, staying away from being gatekeepy, but being informed. So I actually looked up what grimdark means, and the wondrous source of knowledge that is Wikipedia gave me my answer. Grimdark is a subgenre of speculative fiction with a tone, style, or setting that is particularly dystopian, amoral, or violent. Apparently this comes from Warhammer 40k, which I didn't know, and the other thing I didn't know is that it's 40k, like 40,000. I thought everyone was saying 42k, which isn't relevant to this video, but just is one of those, if you never see a word written down, you genuinely don't know how it's written. Before having looked that up, I probably would have said that grimdark fiction is grim and dark, which isn't far off what it actually is, but it's nice to be able to talk about things in a slightly more coherent way. Joe Abercrombie is known for writing grimdark. It's his Twitter handle, for goodness sake. If the man ever fancies ranting romance, he's going to need to find a good nom de plume, or Twitter handle de plume. He's currently based in Bath in the UK, and because I find it interesting, it's not relevant to this video, but just because I'm inherently nosy, he studied psychology at university, and he's also done some video editing in his time, so he has an IMDb page. You can look him up there as well. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say he's probably best known for writing this series and similar books like it, including oodles of things that I have still yet to read. What is the First Law Trilogy about? This is a series that follows multiple different characters, but I'd say some of the most interesting / most focused on characters include a barbarian called Logan Ninefingers, who's very good at fighting. We have a noble who's very dashing and trying to prove himself, but also kind of lazy. We have the sort of evil, we'll come on to it, Inquisitor Glotka, who is probably my favourite character in this series, but we'll come on to that later. There are other characters introduced throughout the books, we get different point of views, but those are probably the ones you'll encounter first and encounter the most. So you have these amoral characters in a world where magic is fading and war is brewing, and to quote the back cover blurb, the line between hero and villain is sharp enough to draw blood. Fantasy in a world that magic is fading and bad things are happening, and these are all bad characters trying to get by. Or bad or amoral, but when you're comparing it to YA heroes, bad characters. Reasons you should read this series. It is a completed trilogy. I'm aware there are standalone books in this universe. There are a spin-off series, which I think I will have a video review up for, but this is a completed trilogy with an immensely satisfying character arc. I absolutely think it is well worth your time to get hold of all 3 of them if you want to read them, and going from start to finish, because the journey that these characters go on, both literally and in terms of character development, is so good. There's pretty much a satisfying arc for every character. That doesn't mean that the good guys win and the bad guys get their comeuppance by any means. In fact, if you want a book like that, then this is not the series to go for. What I'm trying to say is that this whole journey across 3 books is really well thought out and structured. I won't lie to you and say that I understood everything that happened 100% of the time, because I did not, but I knew who I was rooting for, and I knew what I wanted to happen, and I felt the feelings when it didn't happen. And to have that for me in a book so filled with such a motley crew of really unlikable people, I do really think it's well worth reading this full arc. I think you get the most out of it if you follow the characters from book 1 to book 3. I didn't necessarily do that because I picked up book 2 as an audiobook, and I think it jarred me out of it just a little bit, and I didn't get quite the same satisfaction when I got to Last Argument of Kings, and I think on a reread, reading them all physically, it would be quite different. So let's talk about characters. I think that when you're writing a story that calls for these amoral characters, you have to make them interesting. I've read Grimdark before where it felt like everyone was being terrible for the sake of being terrible, and it was incredibly frustrating and I did not enjoy it. It felt a bit like I was being punched in the face by someone wearing knuckle dusters that said, everyone is inherently evil. Not so in this case. In pretty much every aspect of this book, I don't think there's a moment where you don't at least understand a little bit the motivation of the characters. They might not be the best motivations, they might not even be a little bit adequate, they might be lying about their motivations, but they have motivations. When you can take someone from the first part of book 1, look at this terribly evil torturer enjoying torturing someone, how awful does he seem, to the end of book 3 being like, oh, I'm invested in his story. That's impressive character writing for me. I want to talk about the world building a little bit. I personally didn't retain a huge amount of the world building for this series. I got it much more from the spin-off. In this case, it's kind of generic fantasy to me. I don't think it actually is, but that was kind of the impression I had. What I think Joe Abercrombie is good at is creating the feeling of a setting. It's got to a point where I can't read one of his books if I'm not decked out in woolly jumpers and fluffy socks, because everyone is so cold all of the time and it makes me feel cold as well. You really get the sense of that atmosphere and that how your characters are feeling in the moment. And I think in a book where you're quite often having to describe your characters in immense amounts of pain, that's quite important. So while I can't speak without a reread to the world as a whole in this particular trilogy, I can speak to really good descriptive writing. Things you might want to bear in mind if you're thinking about reading this series. Obviously this is Grimdark, it comes with a whole host of content warnings. I will try and find a definitive list of them and link it below if I can find one. If not, I will attempt to compile a vague list together, but as ever, you can always check with me if there's something specific you want to avoid. As I say, I think this is one of the least gratuitously violent Grimdark series I've read, which could be a pro or a con depending on how much you love gratuitous violence. But basically, if violence and general badness isn't for you, then you can probably skip this one. Okay, another thing I wanted to bring up is probably 99.9% a me problem. Names? If you are like me and you really struggle with books where people have more than one name, so sometimes people will call them by a nickname, sometimes they will be called just Commander, sometimes they will be called by their first name, sometimes by their last name. If you are like me and that might lead you to the thinking there are twice as many characters as there are, because you haven't realised that people are being referred to by different names but they are the same person, you might just want to watch out for that. That's all. I'm not saying it deeply confused me in book 2, because no, it definitely did. I got really confused. Comparisons, things to add to your TBR if you liked this or if you want more like this in your future. As I say, I don't read a huge amount of Grimdark, so poking you generally at Justine's channel for Grimdark recommendations. But I have come up with 2 big fantasy series that are kind of my only 2 big fantasy series I ever recommend at the moment. I have A Chorus of Dragons by Jen Lyons. I think it has a lot of the similar, some characters aren't particularly good, but you kind of root for them anyway. And the other one is, for a little bit of medieval bleakness, Robin Hobb. Robin Hobb's Farseer trilogy has some similar bad things happen to good people kind of feelings. Whilst I don't really feel like I can comment on this series from any real position of authority or ability to compare to huge amounts of other things in the subgenre, which makes it slightly frustrating that they are the first books in this entire new series I am starting, I do think if these are for you, they are worth reading. With all the caveats that come with Grimdark being something that's so specific to different people, I do think for me this book really captures the essence of what Grimdark is trying to do without leaning too heavily into that knuckle duster punch to the face. It's very difficult to write books that are about violence without glorifying violence, and I think this series walks that tightrope really well. Thank you so much for watching the first video in this series. I hope it has lived up to expectations. For full disclosure, I'm filming this in September of 2020, so If this is up, that means that I did the thing. Comment below with your favourite grimdark recommendation that is not Joe Abercrombie, because I would like to read more. It is worth noting, because of the nature of this series, episode 2 of this series will be coming out next week, as per the schedule, but the next set of books on my shelf should already have a video out. That is my review for the spin-off series for these, Little Hatred and The Trouble with Peace. That video should already be up, so you can go and check that out if you would like. While you're down there commenting your grimdark recommendations, you can also follow me on all of my social media. That's linked in the description below. You can also subscribe, because it makes me feel loved and appreciated. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. There's gonna be some bloopers now. Oh look! It's my space bisexual sticker. And it ended in 2008 with Before We Are Hanged. Before They Are Hanged. Last Argument of Kings, for goodness sake. He's currently based in Bath. And what is the first Law Trilogy about? This is a I did it, I filmed.